Well, hello. My name is Elizabeth, and I am so excited to be here today with my special guest, Dr. Lucia uh, Capacchione. And this is a topic that is actually really near and dear to my heart. Today, we're going to be talking a little bit about the inner child. Our title today is called Finding Healing, Creativity, and Inner Wisdom Through the Non-Dominant Hand. So Dr. Capacchione has some wonderful things to share with us today regarding this non-dominant hand and how it relates to the inner child and healing. Like I said, this is a topic that I love. It's something that I've been working on. And the most exciting part for me was that upon researching for this interview, I came across your book that I didn't realize was written by you, but I had purchased back in the 90s, probably a year or two after it was published. And I did some of the work in there, and it was very revealing. And so I got super excited, and so I'm even more excited now that you agreed to come on here and talk with me about this topic. So welcome.
Thank you.
So the very first question, I guess we're going to start off with is, what is art therapy?
Art therapy is a form of psychotherapy in which the unconscious is accessed through spontaneous artwork. And the art therapist guides the client with that. So let's say a client comes in and they say, my work situation is just hideous. I can't stand it anymore. The tension there and blah, blah, blah. And so the art therapist might say, okay, here are some markers and crayons. I'd like you to just draw a picture of the situation. It can be scribbles, abstract shapes, whatever, stick figures. And it doesn't have to look like any art, and just put it out on paper. And so that's how we get to the unconscious. It's sort of like doing dream work, because we're accessing a part of the brain that we access when we have dreams. The problem with dreams is that they're very ephemeral and they kind of slip away and we can't remember them. And then as a therapist, I can't really see the dream. I can hear sort of a story about it, but I'd rather see a picture of it or a picture of the situation. And then once they get it out on paper or with clay or some three-dimensional material, then we can talk about it. And from there, we can also perhaps have them draw a picture of how they would like it to be, so that we don't just stay stuck in the problem. We use this creative process to start creating, well, how do we want it?
Okay. Can you expand on that a little bit? What do you mean by what do you want it, or how do you want it? Or...
Well, for instance, if somebody draws me a picture of themselves in a box, okay, and they've got like 4 heavy bands around a picture of themselves, and they say, I just feel really stuck. And they might talk about what areas of their life they feel stuck in. But then later on, I might say, okay, if you weren't stuck, what would it look like? Okay. And now they might draw a picture where those bands that they had around them are not around them, casing them in anymore. Maybe they've now become a foundation on which they are going to build something new.
Okay. So kind of like,
So, or at least they'll be in a picture that looks very different from the one where they're stuck in that box.
nice. So almost like it gives them a starting point on the healing process. So
Exactly.
you get them out of that stuck box and put them in a new perspective. It opens
Right.
up the...
Right. And
Yeah.
because we're using the creative part of the brain, right brain, and oftentimes the non-dominant hand. I'm having people do these. This is unique to my method. It's a whole brain, two-handed method in which people will draw with the non-dominant hand. They'll even write with the non-dominant hand. And sometimes they'll do dialogues back and forth. So I might ask them to write a dialogue with themselves in the box, interview that person in the box. Who are you? How do you feel? Why do you feel that way? What's causing it? And the non-dominant hand will answer. But again, the non-dominant hand is coming from that right brain, very emotional, intuitive side of the brain, but speaks in poetry and expresses through the arts and accesses the unconscious. You know, dreams come to us in images the way art does. They're very surreal. They don't often make any logical sense, but that's not the point. It's not the logical side of the brain. It speaks a different language. So that's what all the arts therapies, and I'm an expressive arts therapist also. So I use movement, I use poetry, music. I'll have people draw to music, you know,
Nice.
and so there's a combination of all the arts.
Awesome. So something that you said regarding the right brain is more the creativity side. Is that true for whatever hand that you're dominant with? So at least, is it, because I hear like left-handers,
Yeah,
different side, and
it's a very good question. I'm probably the only person on the planet that has observed as many people as I have writing and drawing with their non-dominant hand, because I've done hundreds of workshops. I've got readers, 23 books out there. So I got a lot of readers writing to me. I've had clients, I've had trainees and professionals that I've trained. And what I've observed in all of this observation of thousands of people is that people who are left-handed for writing get the same results if they use their other hand as right-handed people. So it really doesn't matter which hand you write with. The other hand has been freed up to access the non-verbal side of the brain. It didn't go to school. And this was confirmed by a very eminent scientist who's since passed away, Dr. Valerie Hunt at UCLA. I gave her a copy of my book, The Power of Your Other Hand, which is all about this method. And I said, Valerie, what do you think is going on here? And she said, well, you figured out a way to sneak into the right brain behind the back of the left brain where logic is and where our critic hangs out. Okay. Our rules and regulations side of the brain is the left side of the brain. Okay. All the rules that we learn. And so if we've learned we're not creative, we've got to sneak around into the right brain behind the back of the voice that says, oh, you're not creative. You're not artistic. You shouldn't be doing this. And she said, and that's what you've done. You snuck in there by using that non-dominant hand, because it doesn't really know about language and rules and regulations. It's got a whole different worldview.
Very interesting. Very interesting.
Exactly. And then, of course, I teach people to actually battle it out with that critic using both hands. So I'll have the critic write in the second person and tell you all the things that are wrong with you, all that negative self-talk, and then let the non-dominant hand, speaking from a very assertive, kind of bratty, sassy inner child, answer back to that critic. And just, 4-letter words, anything goes. Just tell the critic off. And if you've worked through my book, Recovery of Your Inner Child, there's a whole chapter on that. And it's very liberating. I mean, every time I do this in a workshop or a training program, everybody ends up laughing afterwards. They just get a kick out of it because they have been too polite with the critic. They haven't answered back. They haven't asserted themselves. And to let this bratty kid come out is very powerful, very powerful. And it's fun.
That's neat. That's neat.
Yeah.
I really like that idea of letting that bratty kid come out, because I find myself having these, kind of internal arguments within myself, and I've done other, not therapies, but other programs and stuff that take you back, into early childhood, explore like, what were you like the first 7 years of your life, and so I think back and I'm like, wow, I was somebody totally different, and granted, we're supposed to mature and all of that, but we get so locked into that, adulting kind of world that we forget that playfulness and that, that kind of fearless aspect of ourselves.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And in my method, we have to start back. I don't start back with childhood. I start with the child today. because the child is still alive in us. If we're in a physical body, because my definition of the inner child is it's the physical body, it's our sensations of our body, it's also our emotions, okay? It's also our creative expressiveness in the most spontaneous sense. You know, you don't have to teach children to paint or draw or dance or sing. If you give them a positive environment, they will just do that naturally. I know, because my second career was in child development. So
Okay.
I've observed thousands of children preschool age, Head Start kids, okay?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what socioeconomic level, if you give them the right environment, the right materials, they will be creative. That's just a natural ability. Until
Yeah.
it gets shut down, right? By
Right.
critics from the outside. But,
Yeah.
you know, really, that's a natural, innate ability that we have. And the other aspect of the inner child is our spiritual experiencing self, not dogma, not religious teachings, but our sense and our direct experience that there is a higher power, there is some kind of divine reality that we can tap into. And that is a very natural, and it's a very innate ability that we have as children. Now, a lot of times when children talk about it, they get laughed at, so they don't talk about it anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I kind of think of that as our that place you say we tap into. I think of as, you know, like my soul, you know, and my soul and its pureness is just like undefiled, if you will.
That's
Right.
right.
Yeah.
And when I work with trauma survivors, I always try to get across to them that at some level, you know, if they refer to themselves as damaged goods, I go, no. There is a part of us that is untouchable by any human drama or trauma. And we need to get to that place. And of course, we do. In my inner child program, we start with the vulnerable child and the angry child, because those are the two aspects of the inner child that are the most disowned. They get disowned because the culture tells us that you're not supposed to be weak or you're not supposed to be angry. You know, and usually it's along gender lines. You know, men are not supposed to be weak and women aren't supposed to be angry, and we get called names if we are. So we have to start there, and we come in as vulnerable infants. That's our first experience of the world. And as angry, because when we don't get our needs met as babies, what do? We get angry and we cry. That's
Right.
a survival mechanism. It's very important. So we have to go back there, and we have to really find that spot in ourselves that still exists. We still have fear and we still have anger now. And then we reparent ourselves. We find a self-nurturing adult part of us and a protective part of us that knows how to set boundaries. And those two aspects of our personality are totally devoted to taking care of that inner child, our physical, emotional, creative, and spiritual needs. That's their only function. And so once we realize we have those aspects and we can turn them inward, then we're on the road to healing. And once we get there with those healthy inner parents, then we can confront that critical parent and deal with negative self-talk. Once we break through that, then we can go back to what I call healing the wounds of childhood. We're ready to go back and look at what happened to us that was so hurtful, and we're ready to heal it ourselves. We have the tools inside now to go back in memory and to do a time warp and literally go back in time and be with that child who wasn't invited to the birthday party of the friends down the street and sees all the kids celebrating and is out there wandering around wondering why they didn't get invited, and when they were 8 years old or whatever, okay? And be there with that 8-year-old and sit with the child and say, you know, I'm here with you.
Nice.
And I love you. And, you know, I don't know why you didn't get invited, but, you know, I'm here with you. You're not alone. And so we actually go back and do some neurological healing that way. because that trauma is still in the body.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's why I say the inner child lives on, and it lives on in a healthy way too. When we get to the end of my program, as you know, we're dealing with the creative child, but before that, the playful child, because that's the root of creativity, is playfulness, adventurousness, the ability to explore and experiment. Okay, so we go to that playful child, that segues right into the creative child, and then we're into the spiritual child, really. You know? So those are the healthy, healed children in us can really be present. But we've got to start with that, the vulnerable and the angry side, and come to terms with those and accept them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Something that I've been curious about is, why, I know you've been doing this work since the 70s, is that correct?
Now, in 1973, I healed myself from a life-threatening illness by discovering this work.
Oh, wow. Well,
So it's life-saving. I know that.
maybe you can share that in a moment. But why within the last, 20, 30 years, or let's see, no, it's more than 40, 40, 50 years, why suddenly all of this kind of work? Why, what is it that's shifted, do you think, within people that we're having to like go back and heal from, things of like not being invited to a birthday party, or, not healing from, a sense of rejection? What do you think is the root of that? Like, I
Well,
think
I think the human potential movement of the 60s, it started in the 60s, really. During the Second World War, when I grew up, we didn't have the luxury of doing psychotherapy. Okay.
yeah, yeah.
It was very expensive, and it was more analytical, and it wasn't available to the masses. And in the 60s, it was a big human potential movement. A lot of it started in California at the Esalen Institute, right north of where I live on the Big
Okay.
Sur coast. And so a lot of people started developing methods like transactional analysis, which gave us the original framework of the model of having an inner child and having these parent states and this critical parent. And it was a very, rudimentary, simple model that people could understand. Gestalt therapy was developed at Esalen by Fritz Perls. That was a very simple and very powerful method of, moving around the room and getting into different chairs and creating psychodramatic type of dialogue. Psychodrama was developed. A lot of real innovators were really coming to the fore in those 60s and 70s. And I started this work, as I said, in 73 when I became ill. And my therapist was using a combination of transactional analysis and Gestalt, and also Neo-Reichian, what we now call somatic work, where she'd have me take postures and my body would start shaking.
Mm.
And all this energy and emotion would come out. Now, what I did with all that was I translated it into journal work, because having been an artist in my first career and having just started a journal when I got ill, I would go home after the sessions and I would draw pictures of it. And so after one of those Neo-Reichian postures of shaking, I'd go home and I would draw a picture of like the earth cracking apart under my feet, because that's what it felt like. And then I drew a picture of myself in a fetal position, and that was very powerful. Because she would say, well, if you think you're going to fall, just allow yourself to fall to the floor. So I did. But in the drawing, what I saw was, oh, I was in a fetal position. I see this illness. Now, suddenly this graphic is telling me everything about my illness. Oh, the reason I fell apart and was sick was because everything in my life changed. It's like the earth fell apart under my feet. Everything I thought was solid vanished. My marriage, my business partnership, my parents' marriage, my health, my work, everything fell apart. And here I had the symbol of it. And this is the beauty of art therapy. And it's like, yeah, that is what it felt like. And what is this over here? Oh, I fell, the therapist allowed me to fall on the ground. I allowed myself through the illness to give in to all those changes and fall into a fetal position. Well, what's a fetal position all about? It's about rebirth.
Hmm.
So now I have a picture in front of me. Oh, this is the meaning of my illness. This is what is coming out of that illness. And I hadn't found my new career yet. I was in that transition in this therapy, the first therapy. And it led into art therapy. But I was kind of dangling in the middle. I didn't know for sure where I was going. I knew that my old career was kind of dead. It didn't hold any excitement for me anymore. I had been an educational consultant and a child development specialist, and I designed toys for Mattel and all that kind of stuff. But I just wasn't there anymore. And so the illness forced me to, interestingly enough, shelter in place. I was in bed for a whole summer.
Oh, wow.
So I know a lot about sheltering in place because I had to because I was ill. I simply couldn't function normally. And so in that sheltering experience, I discovered the power of journaling. And my journal was all about drawing and writing.
Hmm.
And using an art therapy approach before I knew what art therapy was. A friend of mine told me what art therapy was. I didn't even know about it. I shared some journaling with her. Oh, Jesus, you're doing art therapy. You got to consider becoming an art therapist. And I thought that was basket weaving in mental hospitals. And I didn't know what art therapy was. And then she explained it. It's psychotherapy. And basically the definition that I gave you earlier. And I said, well, that is what I'm doing. Except instead of talking to a therapist, I'm writing about my observations here.
Hmm.
And I'm using language from the left brain, but I'm doing the artwork first. And then my therapist was the one that had me sit on the floor and write with my non-dominant hand. And she only did that a couple of times. She didn't have a whole system of work with that like I developed. She just wanted me to experience the awkwardness of the inner child, the vulnerable child.
Hmm.
Because when you write with your non-dominant hand for the first time, you really regress. You feel like a 4-year-old, 5-year-old just learning to write. It is difficult to form those letters. And usually they're illegible. And people laugh and they go, this is crazy. Why am I doing this? Because that's a wonderful way to really experience the vulnerability and the fragility of that inner child, which is what we want to access.
That's great, though. It seems such a powerful way of giving power back to people instead of having to rely on years and years, maybe even decades of therapy, that you can use these tools to, you know, give show people that they have the ability to heal themselves.
That is the bottom line on my method.
Yeah.
Okay. It's finding your own power within through these tools. The journaling, the art, the movement, drawing to music, whatever of my tools, because it's a big basket of tools. It's about finding your own inner wisdom. And the subtitle of my book, The Power of the Other Hand, it really says it all. Unlock creativity and inner wisdom through the right side of your brain. And that's what we're doing. We're going to the other side of the brain. You see, physiologically, we know from the work of Dr. Shore and others that there is no direct link from the left brain into the limbic system. The limbic system is, deep in the brain, and it is the closet where emotions get stored. So if you want to find stored emotions, you're not going to get there from the left language side of the brain. You're just not. Okay? I mean, you can try, but it's hard. It's very laborious. But if you really want to get into the limbic system, there is a direct link from the right brain. So what is the right brain? That's the place where all of the expressive arts reside. Okay. And that's where we want to go to get into that limbic system. And that's where we find the treasure of all the emotions and the dreams and the aspirations that got stuffed away because of our environment, our upbringing, whatever. And we want to get back into that. And that's, of course, where the inner child hangs out, the emotional inner child, and also the physical inner child. That's why I feel that the expressive arts are so important. I started out as an art therapist, but then I helped pioneer a whole new field called expressive arts therapy. And we have an international organization that I was part of founding. And that discipline really includes lots of physical activity, so a lot of movement and dance therapy along with the art and the psychodramas, all kind of the dramatic art. So it's pretty exciting. Now in my work, I also grafted on the work of other pioneers like Gabrielle Roth, who did 5 rhythms movement, and of course Helen Sitterstone's voice dialogue work. Instead of just using Gestalt, I brought in their methods. I trained with them, in which you actually have the client get up and move around the room and become these different subpersonalities. Mm-hmm. So when I talk to somebody's protective parent, they're usually either standing or sitting quite tall, and they have a very no-nonsense kind of demeanor about them. You can see it in their body language, facial expression, tone of voice, what they say, and I find out, well, how are you, protecting this inner child? Well, there are certain people I don't spend much time with because they're very critical. I can't be around Aunt so-and-so. She's just always criticizing me. So I spend very little time with her. And, I don't watch too much news, and certain channels I avoid altogether, and, so on and so forth. These are the things I have to do to keep the inner child safe and healthy and, calm and less stressed. Okay. And it's a very no-nonsense voice. It's not emotional. It's very adult. When I talk to the person's nurturing parent, whose job is to take care of the inner child, that's a very soft energy. It's like the mother of a newborn baby. It's usually smiling, and it talks with great affection about the inner child and what the child likes to do, and what the nurturing parent is doing to helping the child feel better about this situation or that person or whatever. And it's a totally different energy. It's like 2 different people. Mm-hmm. And it's different aspects of our personality.
Yeah. Very interesting.
Yeah.
Wow. I was thinking, who do you feel is the audience that is more gravitated towards your work? Do you think, do you get a lot of men, or is it mostly?
Well, I'll tell you, it's really interesting. We have a saying in our work: if you can hold a crayon, you can do this work. And I'm not being facetious. All ages, from toddlers to seniors, are using this work.
Okay.
And all populations, regardless of their zip code or their community, have used this work. Now, for people who can't afford it, we've gotten it into places like schools, preschool, pre-kindergarten, all the way through to college.
Nice.
I have a program for children, a book called The Creative Journal for Children, that we've taken into schools. We've trained teachers, taken it into the classroom. They cannot be graded on it. We will not go into a school system if they're going to use grades. These are absolutely confidential. Nobody gets to see the journal but the children.
Okay.
And some school districts won't agree to it, so we don't go in. We want to get the inner critic out of the picture. We want to give the kids tools for dealing with their inner critic. We don't want any outer critics coming into this. No evaluations, no grades, no tests, no nothing. Okay? It's a little oasis in the school day. where the child gets to be themselves. We give them journal prompts because we want them to have some structure. They're not going to just sit there with a blank book and figure out what they want to do. A few kids will probably be able to do that, but most won't. So we give them journal prompts like, how do you feel today? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Draw your feelings out. Write about it. Okay. So they're drawing and they're writing. Well, what better way to practice language skills than focusing on your own life and your own experience and not worrying about anybody judging it or grading it? So the academic gains are phenomenal. Every district that we've gone into has seen academic gains. We've done 2 research projects, one in Southern California, one in Texas. The grades went through the roof. Academic distinctions for one particular school that we worked, 6 academic distinctions based on standardized testing.
Mm.
Okay. And why? They did journaling before the test.
Ah.
Their anxiety about the test? Okay, let's do some journaling about it, kids. Yeah, you nervous about it? Great. Draw the nervous out. What does it look like? What color is it? And write about it. Okay. Now, we don't bring the non-dominant hand in until middle school because preschool and elementary age kids are having a hard enough time writing as it is. And, you know, I mean, the other problem, of course, is that cursive writing is kind of out of the curriculum in a lot of school districts, which is very unfortunate.
Right.
Because there's a part of the brain that has to do with making connections that cursive writing develops, and that's not going to get developed now. It's very unfortunate. Yeah. They just threw the baby out with bathwater on that one.
Mm.
It went all into, oh, we're just going to need printing and we're just going to need computers. I went, well, no, no. Right. And that's why, now you asked, you know, why some of this work is really coming to the fore now. There was a book written about high tech, high touch years ago. Okay. And it was about the more technology we have, the more we're going to hunger and thirst for arts and crafts and stuff that's sensory.
Mm.
And that's what's happening. Look at the uprise of the crafts movement. You know, the huge crafts stores. We didn't have those years ago. You know, it's a whole movement online, you know, craft workshops, because we get tired of all this technology sitting in one place at a keyboard. That's why you can't do my work on a computer.
Right.
When you get really angry and you want to scribble that out, how can you do that on a keyboard or even on a tablet? I've got to be able to make a hole in that paper if I'm that mad with that crayon. I can't do that with technology, with advanced technology. Right. It's not built for that. And that's okay. It's built for something else. But it's not built for owning and expressing raw emotions. Beating up clay, there's nothing like that. You know, pounding the clay, getting the anger and the frustration out.
Right.
And then after you've done that, that same piece of clay can be modeled into something really profound, something, if not beautiful, at least it's very, very expressive of what's going on inside. Same piece of clay. It's not a tennis racket that you beat a chair up with in therapy, or batakas that we used to use in the 70s, where you beat up a chair with this big padded bat.
Or you throw.
Can't do anything else. Yeah, you can't do anything else with a bataka but beat up a chair with it. But clay can become anything. Yeah. And so there you are, and it's a wonderful metaphor. The very same raw material that you just beat up and got angry at and yelled at can now be something that you embrace and you caress it and you have a really sweet, you know, kind of loving relationship with. And you're really going to bring out a whole other part of your personality with the same raw material. It's called life, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So it allows the full range of emotions to be expressed. All these art materials do. Movement, dance, you know, voice dialogue work. I can talk to somebody's, you know, Mother Teresa, compassionate, loving subpersonality who may be a therapist in the world. And I can also talk to her killer.
Hmm.
'Cause she's got that too.
No.
All right. And that killer part might come out as a part that helps fuel the woman who's working in the world to help people who are poor and hungry.
Wow.
Yeah. Because she's so angry
Mm-hmm.
about the injustice that's being done and
Right.
the inequality that fuels her. Oftentimes it's the angry child in us that fuels us to deal with that critical parent. We
Yeah.
need that. It's the gas in the tank.
Right. The kind of the thought of, I think of a little child saying, well, that's not fair, right?
Right.
Yeah. Like,
Right.
why, how come they don't have food, but I do, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And we want, you see, children get that righteous indignation and that righteous anger drilled out of them. Because if it's not convenient for the adults or the other kids, then that sense, that righteous sense of unfairness that they have gets drummed out of them somehow. They get talked out of it. They get gaslighted. Oh, no, that's fine. That's just the way it is. You just have to accept it.
Mm.
Well, no, you don't.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow, that's powerful.
Yeah.
So, wow. If you were to be speaking to somebody who wanted to start this work, what would be the first? You say you've written many books, which I saw listed on Amazon, which I now own 2 of them.
Right.
But which one would you say they should start with?
Well, usually I tell them to go to my website, luciac.com, luciac.com. Or they can go to Amazon if they want. It's easier at my site because they're not going to get, sidetracked onto all these other things. It's like, here's all my books. There are a couple that are out of print, but all that material's been kind of, repurposed back into the books that are in print. So I tell them, just look around and intuitively get a sense about where you're at right now. So let's say I get somebody coming there and it's a writer who wants to write a book and she's very blocked. And she looks at the power of your other hand and she goes, oh, unlock creativity, huh? That sounds like what I need. That's the subtitle. Or somebody who's had a lot of childhood trauma, they're going to look at recovery of your inner child and go, yeah, that's the book for me.
Mm-hmm.
Right? The creative journal, a lot of people are journal keepers, but it's all writing. And they go, oh, the creative journal, that's got art in it. I'm going to try that. That would be different. Okay. That'll expand my journaling. That sounds good. Or there are people that are interested in the expressive arts therapies. They'll see The Art of Emotional Healing, which is a book of activities in the expressive arts with a chapter on each of the expressive arts. So that is a natural for them. People who are dealing with a lot of stress love my coloring books, Drawing Your Stress Away. That title speaks to them right away. Or if they're dealing with a physical problem, hello, this is your body talking. That kind of says it all. And a great part of that book is about coloring in pictures of the body, just doing a diagram, and then dialoguing with the body parts. What are you? What body part are you? How do you feel? Why? Why do you feel that way? What can I do to help you? So it's really a self-healing approach that's very simple. And these are, really, really easy tools to use. And a lot of doors into the work. The book for children, if somebody is working with children, that's the first book they're going to get. Because it's a book for adults, but adults working with children between, relatively young children, preschool age up to about middle school. Creative Journal for Teens is for the teenager, so usually they'll buy that and give it to the teenager, and so on and so forth. There's one for parents. So I always tell people, stop and ask yourself, what's the most urgent issue right now that you want to deal with? And you will probably find a book there that will speak to you.
Great.
Now, some people say, well, I'd like to go through 2 or 3 of your books. So I just tell them, start at the beginning where I did. My first book, Creative Journal, gives the whole theory about art therapy and journaling. and it's got a whole bunch of over 50 journal prompts. And then The Power of the Other Hand, which focuses more on the writing aspect of my work with the non-dominant handwriting.
Okay.
And so those two books are the foundation. But of course, my bestseller is Recovery of Your Inner Child. So anybody who really needs to do inner healing and what we call therapy, that would be the book. And there are a lot of therapists out there using that book with clients. They'll give it to them for homework.
Oh, that's great. That's good. Great to hear. Yeah.
Yeah.
So my last question for you is that if do you teach people how to take this work to others, and do they have to be, you know, a professional? Can they be someone who's just passionate about helping other people?
Right, I do. Over 20 years ago, my associate, Dr. Marcia Nelson, and I created something called Creative Journal Expressive Arts Certification. And we started that in Canada in 1997, actually, due to popular demand there in Canada. And we went back a year later and did an intensive. So the way this works is that we do coursework. Right now we're doing it online because of COVID-19. We can't do live workshops, but normally we would be doing a week-long intensive in October. And then we have a year, and now because of online, a year and a half of field work. And the individuals coming in don't have to be therapists. In fact, the minority of our 80 people in our worldwide community of graduates now are not therapists. Okay, so we get people in who have done perhaps some spiritual counseling, they've done teaching, they've been in classrooms, they've been coaches, they've been tutors, they've done lots of different things. Some of them have been managers, they've worked with groups of people, but not that many social workers or therapists. We've had a few and still do. And so we train them in our methods, and it's more of an educational model. It's not therapy. We are teaching people to use these tools for themselves. And from this CJEA training program, we developed another one called Visioning, based on my book, Visioning, 10 Steps to Designing the Life of Your Dreams. So using all the CJEA tools that they learn in the basic certification program, they can come and take the Visioning coach training and learn to be life and career coaches using the Visioning book. So that is the homework book for the client. And our trainees are given a manual which has the script for each of the 12 sessions that a person would go through in the coaching procedure. And of course, you know, there are lots of additional enrichment trainings that we offer for our graduates, but those are the two basic programs. And it's been very exciting to see people take it into classrooms. Dr. Nelson has taken it to veterans programs. We've worked with the military, active military, who are getting ready to go to Afghanistan and Iraq.
Wow.
We actually sent them there with little laminated journal prompt sheets, little journals, and markers.
That's great.
So they had a tool with them for dealing with some of the emotions that would come up at the time. And this is preventive mental health, because if you're dealing with it when it's happening, you're not going to carry it around in your body, because that's where emotions go. They're either going to go out or they're going to stay in the body.
Right.
So better to get them out, and as soon as possible. And so we've had very, very good results with veterans and with active military. And we've worked with police departments, enforcement. We're getting ready. Dr. Nelson's getting ready to do that now in South Texas. A lot of work with the medical profession, with nurses, and with doctors and alternative healers. So we've taken it to every possible area. You can imagine, I have taught in prison.
Oh, wow.
I did creative journal programs in a women's prison. And I did a correspondence course with men. These were sex offenders in a prison in Northern California. And it was very interesting. One of those sex offenders wrote to me and said, I realized that I was abused sexually as a kid. And I made a decision at some point that there were only two people in the world. There were victims and there were victimizers. And I made a decision that I didn't want to be a victim anymore. So I became a victimizer.
Oh,
That was a mind-blowing letter to receive from this guy.
wow.
Yeah. So there, as I said before, there's no age that we haven't been able to work with, because preschoolers can draw in their journals and they can talk about it. And they can tell the adult what the drawing is all about and how they feel and what's going on with them. And of course, that's not confidential because they're learning to do it, but they're not getting graded or evaluated. They're being encouraged to put their feelings out in this journal. And of course, they're learning sequencing, one page comes after the other. Little children don't know that. They pick up a book and they would go anywhere in the book. So they're learning one page comes after the other, and then they can dictate if they want to, and the adult can write on the page the feeling that they were drawing. And then later on, when they learn to read, they can read their own writing or what they said. Then go back on that journal. Oh, that was the day when I felt sad. That's my sad picture. That's when a day when I was really mad. And that's me being mad. And that's the word mad. So now they're learning to read their own words. Okay. And then eventually they're learning to write their own words. So this can grow with them from if they can hold, as I said, if they can hold a crayon or a marker, make a mark with it, they can do it. Yeah.
And also being able to recognize the different emotions and not being ashamed of them.
Exactly. That's the whole point of this work, is to accept there is no bad emotion. I don't buy the thing about negative emotions. That word negative emotions, no, I don't buy it. The only time it becomes negative is when we judge it and then we store it in the body. It makes us sick. And the judgment of it makes us mentally sick because we're not accepting ourselves as human beings with emotions. That's the human condition. So if you're denying emotions, you're denying the human condition. Well, that's a dead end, isn't it? To be human is to have feelings, and it's also to have a body. And so by accepting the pain in our body, we're also accepting our human condition, and we're not judging it. We're finding out about it. Well, why do I have that pain in my body? What about that pain? What is it that's giving me a pain in the neck? Who is it in my life, or what situation is giving me a headache, a chronic headache? I've worked with cancer patients talk about populations, and they turn their cancer around. Dr. Nelson and our team in South Texas ran cancer support groups for 10 years at the McAllen Public Library. Okay. That's a story you don't hear much. You hear about kids in cages in McAllen, unfortunately, on the border, but you don't hear about the cancer support group at the McAllen Public Library. It was free. And the people who turned cancer around in that group, the family members, the loved ones, the caregivers who came to the group and got tremendous support and love and acceptance and tools to use at home. Yeah, those are the stories you don't hear on the media, unfortunately.
Yeah, we need to hear more of those. I think the world would be a lot more encouraged, and you would see a lot more good being produced. Yeah.
We actually developed a couple of workbooks for facilitators of cancer support groups to use. The Creative Journal for Cancer Support. And we took activities out of all of my other books and adapted them, including a lot of inner child work, for cancer patients. And it's just been amazing. I've met some of these people when I've been down to Texas to visit, and they tell me their stories. And I mean, I end up in tears. It's really moving.
Wow.
They find out. We have a graduate of our training who wrote her own book called Feeling the Shift, about how she turned cancer. She had 4th stage lymphoma. An older woman, not a young kid. Okay? That's usually a death sentence. And she used the method and realized that her inner critic was driving her crazy and making her sick. And she was keeping a journal using colored paper and gluing it in, and she would joke about it as kindergarten art. And her critic was putting her down for it. Oh, this is ugly, it's kindergarten art, it's nothing. And she finally used my method, which she was trained to use, and she sassed back to the critic. And she put that on a Caring Bridge post that I would read from that time to time. And the day I read it, I said, oh, she just turned cancer around. I felt it in my gut. I
Wow.
felt something shift in my stomach. It's like, oh, she just turned that cancer around. Because she just answered back to that critic and told her, just shut up. And that's what she called the book, Feeling the Truth, because she felt it too. And when we talked on the phone, I said, well, Pat, yeah, you turned that around.
Incredible.
And the next time she had her tests, they showed that she was in remission.
That's amazing.
She's still alive and still going strong, and she was traveling before COVID hit, and she's a very dynamic woman, and I've seen her since then. She looks great. Turned it around.
Great.
Yeah.
Wow, that's wonderful news.
Yeah. Her book is wonderful, Feeling the Shift. Yeah, I recommend it to anybody dealing with that. Her book is one of the best books about my method that's been written about healing the body-mind. Because that's our approach is a body-mind approach to healing. And her story really illustrates what I'm talking about. Yeah, Pat Clark. It's available on Amazon.
That's, to me, that, I mean, I've been familiar with like the epigenetics movement, and the, mind-body connection, but to hear like real life stories like this is very encouraging.
I just had a phone conversation with one of our graduates, also in South Texas, Mission, near McAllen. And she is our first in our community to have COVID-19.
Mm.
She went in for treatment because she was diagnosed with bacterial bronchitis. And while she was being treated, they said, well, we're going to test you for COVID. And she tested positive. She ended up in the hospital for a few days, was on oxygen, went home, and now she's using all these tools. She said she's using my journal method. She's doing drawing and writing. She's doing the 5 rhythms movement that I teach them, Gabrielle Roth's work. These 5 rhythms really get in touch with the body physically. She's meditating. She's using some of Deepak Chopra's positive meditations. And she is keeping negativity out of her life and using these journal methods. And she sounded fabulous. I said, you're so inspiring. You are so inspiring because you have all the tools and you're using them all. Oh, she said, she kept saying, I have to do it every day. And she's doing all these things every day. And her mother died in the middle of all this, and she couldn't go to the funeral.
Wow. Amazing.
Yeah. And so she had to deal with telling her family, well, you're on your own. I have to take care of myself now.
Wow.
Yeah. Talk about a protective parent.
Yeah. Well, Lucia, it has been an honor and a pleasure. I am so awed by all this information, and I just thank you for this time. And I hope that everybody's encouraged by this.
And I am glad to be able to share it with others because there are so many tools here for so many purposes. And I am very honored that you would invite me to join you in this enterprise. And I hope that the tools are helpful to some of the people that are participating. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It has been an honor and a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Take care.
You too.